afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. Our goal this afternoon is to provide you with some inspiration for next year's landscaping and gardening chores. So if you're wondering what you can do this time of year when you can't work outside, we've called on our expert to help. Back with me is our frequent contributor from UVM, horticulturalist Leonard Perry. Great to see you again.
Great to be back, Judy.
Well, this is a time of year when people are planning next year's gardens, and you have some suggestions for them.
Right, Judy. Of course, this is the time of year you can spend that time on the internet. You can get a lot of good information there. Seed catalogs, nursery catalogs, either online or in print that come in the mail. This time of year also a good source of information, but sometimes it's good to just have some books. And I brought 3 along today that I like, inexpensive little ones, but some really good information. Of course, there's some tips that we give through the year, so I wanted to go back and revisit a few of those I thought are kind of important. Okay. And then just give some inspiration too from gardens this time of year.
So what have you got? Let's start with the books.
Okay, the first book I brought, this little one here, Native Plants for New England Gardens, so it's appropriate for New England. A lot of interest in native plants now, which is good for pollinators, for insects, written by a couple of authors from the New England Wildflower Society. And this is organized by types of plants, like low ground covers, like there's bearberry. I love the name Arctostaphylos. That's one of those good ones you have to play with, but it's a good 4-season plant. Flowers and then berries, they're good for wildlife. They're not poisonous, so you don't have to worry about that. Then you have that nice fall color. It's great along walks because it'll take salt that you might put on walks. So a lot of good information on each of these plants like that. Here's another native a lot of people may see in the woods when the snow goes, or even through this low snow. It's the Christmas fern, and it shows a close-up picture of that frond coming out in the spring, but it stays green through the season, and that's another good one. So a lot of good information, not only on individual plants, but at the end some lists of plants for different situations, whether it be ground covers like we saw, whether it be windy sites or good foliage, just a lot of different useful lists.
Yeah, that's terrific.
And then the next book I brought is The Garden Tourist, and this one is really neat because it covers gardens. It's a fairly recent book, 120 destination gardens and nurseries in the Northeast, organized by state, and it really has a neat thing in the front. It's some maps that you can look at by state, and with these gardens with suggested day itineraries. So if you're in a certain state, you can get some ideas, gardens to visit. And I've used this in planning garden trip we're going to be making this coming year down to Connecticut. So looked and got some good ideas for those. This past year we actually went to this one in southern Vermont, Manchester. This is Hildene, Robert Todd Lincoln's estate and gardens. And in fact, this year at the Vermont Flower Show in March, we'll be learning more about that from their horticulturist, Andrea Lucchini. So that's just an example. You see the pictures of the garden, a little bit of history when it's open, a lot of good information on these gardens by each state. And then of course, mentioned this year we'll be going down in July to Connecticut on a garden tour. This is White Flower Farm. A lot of people know this, one of the top mail order firms in the country. You can visit it, and it has a nice display gardens, but for specialty perennials in particular, White Flower Farm. So just some examples of gardens in this book, The Garden Tour. So if you want some ideas, now's a good time to be dreaming about those garden trips. And then the last book I brought is another one that's called Caring for Perennials by Janet Makunovich. It's been out for a while, this book, but I've used it. It was really one of the first to talk about perennial care. And she's actually going to be a speaker at the Vermont Flower Show this March 1st through 3rd. One of our keynote speakers. She comes from Michigan and going to give a couple of talks, one on this topic. And she takes a little different approach because she takes example of a garden bed, and here's a nice drawing of it. All the plants are labeled so you can see what's put together, and she talks about the design and then talks about the maintenance. Now this is an example of midsummer work, what you need to do in midsummer. So you can see each part of the each month, for instance, time of the season, what you need to do in that garden bed. And now here's an example of fall, and she's got marked where you could interplant bulbs in there, which I think is a great idea. I've been doing it for years. So in the spring you have bulbs coming up, and when they die, like daffodils, you don't see their foliage, you see these perennials coming up. So a great example of some of the photos in there, photos of procedures and techniques like staking, different staking methods here you see. So there's lots of ways you can do that. And then some really useful tables, like how much time to maintain a garden. And I've used that over the years and used it in talks. You can see it takes a lot more time for the same amount of area in spring than fall, so that's why I try to do as much as I can in the fall. Fall is a very busy time because I realize in spring I'm just not going to have time to do it all.
Right. And we should mention too that all these books and so forth are listed on your website, and we're going to give people that address at the end of the program.
And there's a lot more other books on there and that we've covered in previous shows, so these are just a sampling of the good ones you can get out there.
Now, how about some tips from this past year that we've talked about worth reviewing?
Okay, well, let's start out with grow bags. That's always been, and they seem to get a lot of interest in that. These are those flexible bags made out of fabric. Water can go through, and they kind of have aeration. This is a 15-gallon one. Put soil in it. I use them for potatoes. That's how they started, but they have them for all different crops and different sizes and colors. The newer ones have handles, as you see there. These are potato sprouting, and what I like to do is start those early. As soon as I can get those seed potatoes in April, I put them in these bags at about a third full of this soil compost mixture that I make up, and then I put it like in a unheated garage, or you can put it in a hobby greenhouse, someplace that doesn't really get freezing, but they can get a head start on the season. It gets warmer, you pull them outside, add more soil as those plants grow, and then you can have early potatoes the first part of July rather than the end of summer. So here they are, and I've actually got a little structure I made with just simple pipe here, and have a insect cloth. Previous year I'd had a lot of problem with potato leafhopper that I learned about on this show for man, and so this past year I covered it with that, and you could use Rime as well, but just a way to really protect those. But it's a great way to grow into the season. You just dump those out on a tarp and pull out the potatoes. You don't have to worry about digging. And
yeah, you don't need a lot of room either.
Yeah, and what I do is when the plants die back, I just leave them in the bags right up till it starts getting cold, and I want some potatoes. I just go out and dig in there and pull them out.
What about ideas for flowers?
Okay, we always talk about some flowers. So I brought one today, peonies. I think that is just one of the classic perennials most people know. If you want an easy perennial, it's going to last a long time, decades, 50 years or more. Peonies are it. And a lot of the newer ones, newer varieties, don't really need much staking. They don't flop down. This is an example of Nippon Beauty. It's a Japanese type with that really pretty stamens in the middle, the petals. So that's just one type. There's several different types. Of course, here are the double peonies, like the next one here, Red Charm. That's one of the best double peonies out there. Again, we're talking, June bloom for these.
It's so hard to pick just one.
Oh, yeah, there are. So I have quite a few. And if you really want something special, try some of the what are called Ito peonies. A man by that name in Japan first bred these. They're a cross between the ones we saw, the herbaceous, and then the tree peony. So it has the habit of the lower herbaceous, but some of the colors of the tree peonies, like yellow. You just don't find yellow in the standard peonies. And Bartzella is one of the classic ones, and they cost a bit more money, but again, they will last. They're hardy. I've had mine for years, and they're just stunning when you see those colors out there. So peonies are a great one to think about for the garden if you don't have any, or like you say, to get more.
Get more, always get more.
Yeah.
Now, one of the plants that you talked about this year was actually kind of a dangerous invasive species that we're seeing everywhere now.
Right. You're probably talking the wild parsnip, which we've talked about last couple of years because more and more people are getting it. It is really spreading. This is what the plant looks like in July when it's in full bloom, maybe 6 feet tall or so. And it goes in a few days, it seems like, from those pretty yellow flowers to those brown seeds that then just scatter everywhere. And they make these seedlings. So early in the season, you see these, beware, because I've found, even the hard way, I've realized these are the seedlings, but weed whacking them, if any of that sap, even from these seedlings, gets on your skin with the sunlight, it will cause a rash. And that can be really stinging.
Not only a rash, but blisters, horrible
blisters. I know we've actually on the show showed a person that had ended up in hospital with that. So again, be really cautious of sap. I wear, either you can work, I know some people use lights and work out at night when it's not light or dusk. I tend to, just put on long sleeves and all the protective gear. But again, just be careful you don't get any of those little bits that fling up, say, from a weed whacker on your skin or anything like that. So, and the problem is it really spreads. Here it's just taking over a hayfield, you know, and these seeds, they just will go anywhere. And
there are a lot of seeds, too.
Yeah, and they just will grow in this, and they will kill out other things. They can poison cattle. So it's just really can be a problem.
And it's really hard to get rid of them, too.
It really is. Again, you just have to, that's where some of these chemicals can come into play, but when it gets so out of control, it's really hard. You just have to kind of take an area and keep at it, but then more seeds will come up next year, so you have to come back, and then you get all yours done, they'll blow in from outside. So it's just, it's almost hopeless now.
Yeah, I know.
It's
really
beautiful. You see along roadsides, big masses of them, but it's one of those real problem plants to be aware of if you have it.
Be dangerous. Make sure that you know your kids are aware of that too.
Exactly. That's a big thing.
All right. Now this year, once again, you took us to some gardens near and far, and they were all excellent tours, and loved seeing the pictures of them. There was one that really kind of stood out.
Right. There's one that I really wanted to revisit again because it is so special. And these are the mosaic cultures. Now these are structures larger than life. Here you see a full-size or larger, you know, bison and a polar bear and what's called a Inukshuk. That's from northern Canada. This was actually up in Ottawa, this exhibit, and Gatineau, actually across the river. And then all these plantings, which are beautiful. You know,
now those are actually
like
living plants that are in
these are
sculptures.
all plants in the structures and in the ground. Now what they do with the structures, it's different from topiary, where you train a plant over a frame. These are planted in the frame. They have a frame with like chicken wire and soil inside or some sort of mesh that they then make holes in, plant these plants. So for instance, all those structures you see are plants growing together in a frame of soil that they have to keep watered daily, they have to keep pruned, and we got an example of that when we were up there. Almost every of these, one of these structures had somebody working on it with either scissors or hedge clippers, clipping those, you know, every few days to keep them in that beautiful shape here. So just a true work of art on these mosaic cultures. Now, we visited those a couple years ago in there, and this year they were back as well. Usually it's about every 3 years. They have these. They've done them each year in conjunction with China. China is where these really originated, so each year China has an exhibit. These are dragons from there. I love that blue marble and different types of artemisias in the foreground, just different textures of that silver. Last year, when they were celebrating the 150th of Canada, they had things, and we saw them again this past year, from all over Canada. For instance, this is a recreation of the first train that crossed Canada back in the 1860s, and in the foreground, cosmos are the orange, rudbeckias are the yellow, just making a sea look like a field there that this train's coming through. Again, life-size, all with plants planted in that. And then some other legends and stories, the man who planted a tree, is showing the effect one person can have. Again, a dog with all the carex grass growing on it. Just incredible, some of this detail and work. The motion they get in these, like these horses running, it looks like the wind's blowing. Again, with those different types of carex grasses and a lot of different other things in those, as well as in the beds all planted together. One of the most famous they've had each year is Mother Earth. Now this is, again, 40, 50 feet high, and just thousands, tens of thousands of plants planted in that with the water in the hand, and just truly incredible. And just expression they get on these, not just the animals like the horses, but on her face. It's just truly incredible how they do that. It's just total works of horticultural art, and it's fun just to revisit some of these, and you can find so many things like that online too, to just really get inspired.
We should mention that you have some of these photos on your website as well.
I do have a lot, and in fact I have some of the original shows, in fact going back to 2000 when they first started in Montreal, then 2003 on my website, Perry's Perennial Pages, perrysperennials.info or .com. You can go into the videos. We've got a lot of these from the past up there. Of course, articles I still put up each month on a lot of these topics we cover through the year, and I mentioned some today, different types of peonies, for instance, and so forth, and my garden tours.
Yeah,
and
tell us about what
I
you have
mentioned
in store this year.
Coming this year, the middle of July, we'll be taking 3 days to go down to Connecticut, see some historic gardens there and White Flower Farm, and then of course we'll be going back to Montreal to see the Chinese lanterns in September. So those are the ones in work so far. If you're interested, you can watch the website. I've actually got a contact on there. You can get on my list to be the first to hear about those. So I know people have done that, and so they get first notice of these tours, and when the registration's ready, hopefully soon for this Connecticut tour.
All right, Leonard, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.